everybody, and thank you so much for coming to this event. We're thrilled to be commemorating the first event in residency that we've been kind of having an extended conversation with Bea over the last, well, several months, 6 months at least, about this wonderful exhibition on the 5th floor that just got installed basically up to the last minute yesterday when we opened. And it's a very simple installation, as those of you who've been on the 5th floor have seen, but also incredibly technically challenging, in fact. So we're really proud of how simple it looks. My name's Johanna Burton. I'm the director and curator of education and public engagement here at the New Museum. And I worked on this project with two of my amazing colleagues, Lauren Cornell, who's in the front row, and Sarah O'Keefe, who will also introduce the speakers in a moment. And I just want to thank the team who worked on this show, as well as everybody else in the education department who were crucial members of the task force and the exhibitions team in particular. So the way in which we do residencies at the New Museum, I think, is important, and I'm going to give a quick overview so you understand the context of Bea's exhibition. The idea is that you should be able to come into the museum with very little understanding and be able to walk onto the floor and have a great experience of it as an exhibition on its own. But it's also part of what is now a fairly long-term commitment from the education department to making the center component of what we do revolve around living artists. So the idea of an education department in a museum that does not have a collection means that we're turning particularly to process and to thinking about ideas in real time. So for the last 3 years or so, I have created a program with my staff where we invite artists to come in and think really actively with us around what we consider to be kind of urgent, pressing ideas. So we've done residencies around choreography. We have one coming up around democracy, which should be interesting. And the current season is around legacy, so ideas of transmission of history in various ways, whether it's through material, whether it's through storytelling. And as we were conceiving of this particular thematic, which started with Cheryl Donegan, whose show just closed last week, Bea came to mind as an artist that the three of us felt was extremely pertinent in terms of thinking about histories and cultural stories in different ways, particularly through the lens of objects. So she's been here in residence putting together a show which Sarah will talk a little bit more about. But for the first discussion, we really wanted to pair her with somebody who could bring an amazing new lens to these ideas, both in Bea's work and beyond. So with that, I'm going to actually turn this over to Sarah, as I mentioned, who's going to read the bios and also talk a little bit about the show. But if you have questions about the residencies or the seasons, let me know. And thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
So thanks. I know it's the first, it feels to me like it's the first real day of summer, so thank you for coming and spending the evening with us in the auditorium and coming to see the show. We're just so, has been such a pleasure to be working with Bea on this exhibition. It's been really wonderful through the education department to really partner with artists and to speak with them about who they want to speak with. And so part of this program has been to turn to artists and say, if you were in conversation with anybody, who in your dream scenario would you be talking to? And Bea immediately said, I would like to speak with this psychoanalyst, Patricia Gherovici. So we're very lucky to have them here, and for those of you who haven't had a chance to see the exhibition on the 5th floor, you can see a series of videos. The title of them actually lends the name to the show, Song, Strategy, Sign. And there's a series of videos that are loosely adaptations based on Monique Wittig's novel, Les Guérillères, written in 1969. It's an incredible novel that describes a world after a battle between the sexes in which the women have won and the patriarchy has been overthrown. And where the women, right? And it describes a world that the women together are shaping and really taking pleasure in speaking with one another, eating with one another, living with one another, and finding new forms for how to be with one another. So you'll see a video up there. Bea is currently working on a feature-length version, but you can see a 3-channel video that describes her relationships and sort of the kinds of forms and languages that many of her close friends and collaborators have created with her. You'll also see up there a 16mm film, which is all footage shot of people that Bea has worked with closely in previous film projects, all shot in Vieques. For those of you who don't know, it is a town that was bombed by the US military for 60 years. It has a US Navy base, and it's a town of many contradictions. It's incredibly beautiful, it's incredibly seductive. People are going there, it's a kind of resort town. And there's also many unexploded bombs there, and there's a lot of toxicity, and there's a lot of cancer, and people who come there won't eat the fish from there. So Bea has worked closely with many people who live there. A woman who had cancer and who has been resurrected in a way, performing a ritual. There are many different kinds of rituals, I should say, that are happening up there on the 5th floor, so maybe that's enough. And then there's also many objects which will be part of the feature-length film that Bea is working on and is going to be shooting next door over the next couple months. Some footage, more footage elsewhere. So with that, maybe I'll just read a little bit, the description of the event, and then also the bios of the 2 speakers and hand it over to them. So the description that you probably saw on our site and that we also sent around is, join us for a conversation between artist Beatriz Santiago Muñoz and psychoanalyst Patricia Gherovici on feminist utopias, the possibility of developing new languages to describe ourselves, and psychoanalysis's role in propelling and undermining strategies of resistance. Organized on the occasion of Beatriz Santiago Muñoz Song, Strategy, Sign, the conversation will take Santiago Muñoz's presentation at the New Museum as a jumping off point for discussion. Okay, and so Patricia Gherovici is a psychoanalyst and analytic supervisor. She is currently senior member, analyst, supervisor, and faculty at Apricot Psychoanalytic Association, New York, and co-founder and director of the Philadelphia Lacan Group. Her books include The Puerto Rico Syndrome, which won the Grandiva Award and the Boyer Prize. Also, Please Select Your Gender, From the Invention of Hysteria to the Democratization of Transgenderism. Gherovici has also contributed to Lacan and Addiction, an anthology, The Literary Lacan, From Literature to Literature and Beyond. She's recently published a new collection with Manya Steinkohler titled Lacan on Madness, Madness, Yes, You Can't. And she's currently her new book, Psychoanalysis Needs a Sex Change, Lacanian Approaches to Sexual and Social Difference, will be published by Routledge in 2016. Okay, and so I'll read a little bit about Bea. Beatriz Santiago Muñoz was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, where she currently lives and works. Her recent exhibitions include, including the one upstairs, is Beatriz Santiago Muñoz, A Universe of Fragile Mirrors, which is actually currently on view at the Perez Art Museum. So yeah, I'm gonna breeze through some of them, Bea. I hope that's okay. Under the Same Sun, Art from Latin America Today at the Guggenheim. Post-military cinema at Transmission Gallery in Glasgow. The Black Cave at Gasworks in London. A screening at the Tate Modern. A screening at the Merscole Biennial. And also at the Wattis Institute for Contemporary Art in San Francisco. And I should also say, Santiago Muñoz is the co-founder of Beta Local, an arts organization in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and director of Sessions, a series of intensive seminars anchored in the specific geography, emerging art practices, and socio-political conditions of Puerto Rico. And I should also say the exhibition and the film is supported by the Creative Capital Visual Arts Fund, which is also supporting the feature film that she's currently working on. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you two.
Okay, so I'll thank you all, and thank you all, like the crew involved here and everybody that came, and it's so great to see all of you here. and Siri as well. I'm glad Siri's here. I'll just tell you a little bit about what we'll try to do, because I think it involves all of you as well. Yes. So I'll speak a little bit about previous work, because I want to sort of point out some relationships that it might have to the work upstairs, and also to Patricia's work as an analyst and also as a writer. So we have certain things that we want to get to talk to, maybe certain words and ideas, like the idea of creation of a new language, or the idea of ethnography, or the relationship between that psychoanalysis, or the analogous relationship that psychoanalysis might have to creation, to art. So we want to get to all these places, and we're first going to talk to you a little bit about my work, and then Patricia's work, and then we'll have a conversation, and then we'll open up the conversation to everyone who's here. So I'll start by showing some clips and maybe giving some context to people who are not so familiar with my work. First, we're going to watch how a Mac works. And I just want to say a few things that are important in my process. I sometimes say that my process is very similar, or looks similar, to an ethnographic process, because there's a long time of observation involved, and maybe start out interested in a person or a group of people or a place. And I don't start out with a specific script or a set idea about what I'm going to do, but with a process of looking, of paying attention. And then as there is maybe a provoked encounter with people that are interested in working with me, we start creating a structure that has certain performative aspects and certain documentary aspects. So this encounter is strange, not entirely codified, in the sense that it's not clear who I am and what I want in the sort of cosmic sense of the word, or them. It's not like there's like patient, doctor, client, these kinds of codified relationships. It's a little bit more open. So we have a space of encounter to be able to find some kind of subjectivity, and to create together from that subjectivity in a way that might be surprising for both of us or all of us involved. This is a process that I'm interested in. So I'll show you first a clip of La Cueva Negra, the Black Cave. This is a 4-minute clip. Maybe I'll actually, it's a 4.5-minute clip. I might show shorter pieces than what I thought, because we're starting a bit late. But I'll let you watch this and then keep talking.
El primero en salir de la cueva se convirtió en piedra. El próximo en motora. Un grupo salió junto y se convirtieron en murciélagos que pescaban de noche. Nosotros esperamos a que escampara.
so there's this kind of strange encounter that is the beginning of a process of creating something together. I also want to talk about another something else that I'm really interested in, which is recently I finished a series of works that all have to do with post-military land, post-military space. So I'm interested in creating, experimenting with a new language, a new visual language that might break us out of the identification coming from a place that has been occupied and a place that its visual representation has been dominated by the visual representations of military dominating point of view, aerial, drone identification, that this kind of visuality. I'm interested in creating a different kind of visual language that breaks this and allows us to think something else about the place, allows us to think in a different way about the place. And so, this process for me, I'm just going to talk over this footage actually, rather than let you watch it whole. But this process for me, I was interested in doing it from like a very material, formal place. Instead of thinking about the kind of image that the camera will produce when faced with a monumental military structures, then what about if we sort of break, fold, and change the scale in which we are able to see? So they're very concrete visual experiments in order to be able to see, think, listen differently in this place, so that the dog that takes 10 minutes to walk from one end to the other is brought back to a human scale and to other uses in the same way that now fishermen are coming back into this closed base. And as they use it from the shore as a place, as they turn it into a shore again, they open up many different uses and ways of thinking about it that are not possible when you only see the nostalgia for the military ruin, which is something very heavy and very hard to escape visually. So all these recent works are different attempts to see differently, to see this space differently, in order to be able to think about it differently. This is, oh, it doesn't let me turn it down. This is, for example, another work called Ojos para mis enemigos, also shot inside the base that was closed 10 years ago. There's an interesting aspect that I learned while I was shooting here, which is that a secondary forest will be indistinguishable from a primary forest in the tropics in Puerto Rico in 60 years. So that this is not, you have to learn to see this you have to learn to see this event in process. It takes 60 years, but we're already 1/6 of the way into it becoming a forest. And now this is cotton that was here from 60 years before, growing to a point at which it becomes useless to the old economy that was there, also useless to the military purposes of the base. And now Pedro Ortiz, who's the man in the film, is picking the cotton to give it as a gift to Obatala, who is his head saint. So is also creating, through this other use, is opening up different possibilities to think about the place. So different ways of getting at a similar place as the previous work. And then I think I'm going to show you one last clip of a video called La Cabeza Mató a Todos, which is a collaboration with Michel Nono. And this one worked in a little bit a different way, in the sense that she's somebody that I've known for a long time, and I'm interested in certain ideas about how she uses medicinal plants, how she thinks about her physical space, who comes in, how she teaches, and also her physical presence and the power that that may have, and conversations that we'd had about sort of the power of mystical thought or irrational thought. Two-minute clip, but this one does have sound.
Ocupan un espacio entre medio. No glorifican la maternidad ni la guerra. Caen como la fruta de un árbol.
So we'll get to talk about all these things later. I'm going to give the computer and the mic over to Patricia now.
Thank you. I'm very happy to have the opportunity of having continued. We have all day a very interesting conversation, and it's great to maybe open it up and continue that dialogue with you. And perhaps to continue in the modality of the show and tell, I will show you a little clip. This is a segment from a documentary that was screened on April 1st, April Fool's Day. But it wasn't a joke. And the title of the documentary is Psychoanalysis in El Barrio. Nevertheless, many may have thought that we were kidding. Psychoanalysis in El Barrio, because often the underlying assumption when it is believed that psychoanalysis may not be the best approach to deal with poor people, they have real concrete problems that should be dealt the other ways. The underlying assumption is that poor people cannot afford to have an unconscious. And to prove this assumption wrong, I'll show you maybe the beginning of the context from where this prejudice could take place, and the practice that contradicts it is also taking place. So, no, this is here, I think here. Now we are going to take a trip that is a nice experiment in socio-economical change, because in a 10-minute ride we will be able to go from well-off middle-class bustling business, nice comfortable middle-class homes, onto an area of post-industrial Philadelphia with abandoned factories. Some of them have been reclaimed as living space with nice lofts. At the end of the 19th century, Philadelphia was one of the biggest industrial cities in the world. Many people in Puerto Rico were recruited to come and work, attracted by this, by then, very vibrant factory activity that no longer exist. And now if you look at the setting, it looks like a relic of a past. Then we'll see the collapse of the welfare state with abandoned projects. And we'll make a left there, and that will be the bloque de oro, the golden block. It's the heart of the neighborhood. Man-made palm trees to give you memories of beautiful tropical settings. And the golden block sidewalks have this yellow swirl painted onto the ground to commemorate the dream of getting rich quickly in America. Like many of my patients, I am an immigrant. And when I came here, I didn't feel that comfortable doing clinical practice in English. And I found the possibility of working with the Hispanic community of North Philadelphia. And I use the word Hispanic, and maybe we could talk about that purposely. I discovered a vibrant community that lives in a very precarious condition, that survives in very difficult and challenging situations. I would hear every day at the clinic a report of a death, every single day. And this major thoroughfare is where that building across the street is the clinics, was called then Centro de Servicios para Hispanos, and it was the first place I worked at for almost 5 years. As my title there was staff psychologist, and that's where I discovered the neighborhood, the community, and the possibility of psychoanalysis in the barrio. Well, and thanks to that experience, I was connected to Beatriz, who read my work. And maybe, perhaps because we were having as one of the objectives today the discussion about whether or not psychoanalysis could be a strategy of resistance, or maybe another manifestation of resistance, if we think that we can assume that certain populations are outside the effects of the unconscious. Maybe I will give you a few images to contextualize a little the experience of working. Let's see, it's not open, it should be through. Yeah. So I work in the North Philadelphia community. It's a mostly Puerto Rican community, 90%. And as you saw before, it's not too far from where I call the cave. So we have La Cueva Negra. And I found myself working on this cave, and perhaps to maybe because truth has the structure of fiction, I will share with you maybe a little anecdote, which is true, nevertheless, or even though it may sound fictional. This is the subway is elevated, and in the cave, what is interesting is that since there is this construction, the community lives in a situation in which the sky is known to be there, but never actually seen. So one morning, I arrive at the clinic, I get off the subway and I clamber down the stairs to get to the clinic. That was the second clinic. I worked in 2 different places during my experience in the barrio. And I realized an unusual level of activity. So naively, I thought, oh, gentrification is catching up with the barrio, because there were all these crowds of people cleaning up, and all the walls were being painted. And on second look, I see a lot of lighting equipment. What was happening was that they were filming the movie 12 Monkeys. I don't know if you are familiar. For those who haven't seen the film, it's post-apocalyptic. Maybe after the War of the Sexes has concluded, this is what happens. In this version, the end of the war is renders the surface of the earth uninhabitable. People are surviving underground, and Philadelphia is populated only by giraffes, ambling, lions around City Hall, and the only way to go out on ground would be wearing this strange equipment to protect oneself from the toxic air. So this is the movie that was being shot with Brad Pitt, Madeleine Stowe. So this Hollywood film gave me an interesting revelation. The barrio needed it to be cleaned up to look post-apocalyptic. But this is not one of the realities. What I think is more important than that invisibility is the fact that the barrio needed to be painted over to become visible. So they need to be concealed. And I think this is an issue of invisibility, which I'm always quite interested about, and maybe would be one of the things we could discuss. And in this communication we have, because we were before talking with Beatriz, that she describes her work as ethnographic, and I found myself surprised when I wrote that book, The Puerto Rican Syndrome, that it caught a lot of attention from anthropologists. I was very pleased to see that I got even an award from an anthropological association. To my big surprise, I thought I was just writing as a psychoanalyst, and we were discussing that with Beatriz, that the clinical work in the setting of the ghetto is a reminder that one cannot see symptoms outside the social, which is something one can never do. But maybe in private practice, working only with middle-class patients, one could bracket this off, and maybe one has to go back when Freud said that when one looks closely to individual psychology, one sees that it is social psychology as well. In that kind of setting, which is paradoxically very politicized, one cannot take into account all the historical context and maybe take individual symptoms also in the sense that they could function as allegories of social situations. And one clear example came with this strange diagnosis I encountered of the Puerto Rican syndrome. I don't know if you heard it, but maybe you have heard of ataque de nervios, or for those from Puerto Rico, el ataque or juju, and juju. So this terrible pathology seen from the perspective of the mainline in Puerto Rico is considered an expectable behavior. If you lose a loved one, you're supposed to have a nervous breakdown as an expression of your sorrow. It's a culturally sanctioned activity that, when seen outside that cultural context, becomes a pathology, to the point that it shows up in psychiatric texts. The curious thing for me was very surprising for somebody with a psychoanalytic formation, was to discover that the description of what was called Puerto Rican syndrome was exactly the same description of the most famous form of hysteria, the late 19th century form of hysteria, with which Freud discovered not only the unconscious, but also invented psychoanalysis by treating these seemingly very mysterious symptoms that were resistant to the traditional medical approach. So maybe to give you that context of possible embodiments of resistance, and also maybe new ways of visualizing. That's why I wanted you to make a little trip into the barrio to visualize something that often is hidden. It's like the hidden side of a reality. One doesn't need to go too far to encounter it also here in Manhattan. So maybe I will stop there, and perhaps we could take up where we left off in the conversation.
We began speaking downstairs about Monique Wittig's text, Les Guérillères, and something that I always found very attractive as an idea, and that, like I mentioned, I'm concerned with, which is the idea of creating a new language and of dealing with forms, with words, with construction of the epic narrative that she's writing. Like, she creates a circular narrative. She takes out certain words or pronouns. She emphasizes others. Through a text that Sarah found while she was doing research, an interview with Monique Wittig, we realized that in the translation to English, she had actually wanted the translation of elle, the female plural pronoun, to be translated as the she's, not as the women. So there's very specific work. This idea that you have to create a new language to bring forth, to call forth a different kind of social order is a common 20th century avant-garde art idea. It's in all of the 20th century avant-gardes. I'm still interested in it. I think that there's a usefulness in breaking formal structures and seeing what can happen, of putting a bomb within it and seeing what sort of pieces come out of it, and in seeing what could be a new language. So you were mentioning was it Lacan who said that the unconscious is structured like a language, and psychoanalysis is such a language-based work. So I was interested in your ideas about the possibility of creating a new language, or also what Wittig talks about, what she's paying specific attention to, which is the interval, what cannot be named, what does not have a name. So that, for example, it's an epic narrative about a war between women and men, and yet there are no battle scenes. It's all descriptions of what they eat, how they touch each other, what they're wearing, what the steam feels like. It's a very sensorial and material, also something that I'm interested in, thinking through the sensorial and material. So I'm interested in what your thoughts might be about this.
Yeah, we were trying to maybe take it as a sort of metaphor of the work of analysis. If psychoanalysis is a cure that is made of words and silences, so it is in the interactions of these two elements, and that the material we work with is speech, whatever comes to mind is regarding whether or not it's inconvenient, obscene, the fundamental rule that I'm paraphrasing. And what is, I think, the only weapon, and it's not much we have at our disposal as psychoanalysts, is equivocation. And we were talking about weapons. I'm here quoting Lacan. He uses this word purposely. He says weapon. And maybe there is something about war, maybe the death drive, if we want to add a little twist to this notion that needs to be brought into the analytic space in order, perhaps, if not to create a new language, because that's quite an ambitious process, but nevertheless, I think that something new with language can be made in the process of analysis, in which certain words could be dropped and maybe lose the meaning they initially had, and maybe a word that has a lot of effect, maybe we could say a word too close to what we may conceive of as trauma, could then, at the end of a cure, be reduced to family history, to an event that was experienced without having the same power, or words that could be taboo, words that haven't been explicitly enunciated but have circulated and have been heard nevertheless, or may still have effects. And in that sense, we were also discussing specifically the text, Les Guérillères, because there is this nice cutting of there is a narration that is quite original with a very unique use of language, but that follows a certain model of narrative that we could be used to, and is suddenly truncated by the introduction of a list of female names, first names, that some are sort of expectable, like Isadora, but then we have Edipa. So we have a sort of catalog of feminine names that insist in a way that made me think of how at times some signifiers in analysis could insist, like a dead letter that is a sort of cyst that could eventually develop in a sort of cancerous way. We were thinking of Vieques and the toxicity, or could maybe be perhaps extracted and eventually let fall, drop, or acquire a new value. That I don't know if would Vieques ever lose his toxicity would be the question.
Right. Yeah, or whether it can be sort of transformed through poetic thought or language, which is, I mean, that's where things get complicated, because there's some things that may be able to be transformed through symbolic structures and others that are actual bombs on the ground. Now that you mentioned the names, I was thinking about something that also we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is that what the text tries to do, or maybe struggles with, is the relationship between the individual, the proper name, and sort of the autonomous individual, and the idea of the collective. There's many different forms of collectives described within the text, and but I was wondering how psychoanalysis deals with this tension between the individual, because the practice, clinical practice, is individual, and yet it's very important, especially for you, in your clinical practice, to be able to analyze also the ways in which political forces, social forces are helping to produce the symptom. So how do you address collective political problems through an individual clinical practice? Is it possible? Or is psychoanalysis then not the right tool in order to address collective transformations?
Well, that's I think the challenge. The psychoanalysis works in a case by case, so it's not a very ambitious political project. It's one by one, and each case is unique and cannot be reproduced. One psychoanalysis could not be duplicated because there is something very singular and very idiosyncratic about one specific subjective story. Nevertheless, and also Lacan is not very, when he says, what does psychoanalysis offer, he's not that ambitious. He says, a little bit of freedom. Well, nevertheless, a little bit of freedom is a little bit of freedom. So we could maybe in the case by case have effects. And psychoanalysis in the barrios already, I think, an idea of introducing a political practice, and this is one by one, but nevertheless with considerable effects.
You were also saying that it only it's only a tool with when the analyst does not identify with the state, has no power, that there's that the times or places where it has become very identified with power, it loses its power.
Yeah, because in a way, what your question has to do with a kind of distortion of psychoanalysis to believe that it's not a political practice. It is a political practice. And I think the medical model, especially in the North American context, has influenced and made analysts believe that they can be objective, they can be neutral, that it's a sub-medical practice, which is not. And I think in the many experiences in Latin America, psychoanalysis has shown to be a quite political practice with political effects that is not a political discourse. Lacan describes psychoanalysis as the symptom of capitalism. When capitalism will end, we'll no longer need psychoanalysis. But maybe for the time being, I think there's some work to be done. Well,
right.
Maybe we would like to return, because we had a very productive and interesting conversation about how the model of art could be perhaps taken as a kind of metaphor of a successful cure, and maybe I would like to hear more about your process, because I think as a psychoanalyst there is a lot we can learn from the process of creation, that in a successful cure, something of the order of an invention, of something similar to the work of an artist, maybe not as gifted as Beatriz, but any analyst in a successful cure does something of the order of a creation that will allow for something new to emerge from a symptom. Say from a post-colonial, contaminated Vieques, we can have these beautiful images you have of the little boy playing with a skeleton that is exactly his size. So in these probably highly polluted waters.
Well, this is, I mean, it's the contradiction. It's not really contradiction. It's the problem. It's the problem that the place presents to you, which is that it's impossible to represent visually what is actually that toxicity, for example, or it's impossible to represent visually what military occupation is. I'm interested in the kind of, when earlier you mentioned the words destabilizing, so the destabilization of the unconscious. I think about how that is something that I look for in the process of making the work, destabilization of my own subjectivity. And I look for it in these strange encounters and attempt to set in motion a machine which may produce something that is a new image or a new idea that surprises even the people that were involved in the making of it. Is this also, again, this idea of breaking the order that you have been formed within, that you can't escape. You have to almost sort of put in motion traps for yourself to fall into. I'm really attracted also to the idea of the symptom as a process of creation. I think there's something analogous there as well. And I wonder also if then there's the process of analysis, but then there's a process that then the creation is also a process not just of analyzing subject formation, but of transforming the subject, which is always formed in relationship to others. Not just to others. I mean, I believe that it's also formed in relationship to the place, to the plants, to the animals around you. It's a more open, shared subjectivity than just in relationship to other humans. But so maybe it's not that one process needs to come after the other, but they're complementary processes. The analysis and the process of creation that takes those. Instead of reflecting upon subject formation, then provokes its transformation. I think that there's that's collective work. Yeah, maybe not something that can happen individually so successfully. Maybe it's time to open up the discussion.
Please.
To others or questions or ideas. For sure.
When you talk about working through ideas in the material, could you talk a little bit about when you first started thinking about that and making work that way?
I think maybe it was when I first came back to Puerto Rico after studying in the United States. Because there's a way in which the place itself allows you to think different thoughts. You know, every place in the world, every person that you're with allows you to think differently. And so it was clear for some reason that certain ideas and ways of working that I had been trained in or that I had been used to working in were not relevant, and that also another way of thinking, which you sort of apply theoretical analysis and then see how this place fits into it, was frustrating and impossible. It was obvious that I needed to pay attention from a ground level, no? Pay attention to really basic material and sensorial qualities, to the way people treat each other, look at each other, to the way the light falls, to the way, to things that are maybe more empirical, in order to, through that, be able to theorize from a place, rather than to think from a theory and think through a theory. So I think that I am just beginning to, from a kind of ground level thinking, get to some kind of theoretical positions, but they're from there. So I think that it was returning to this other place, thinking differently from it, and knowing that I needed to pay attention.
Hi. I feel like I'm detecting the beginning, maybe like a little tension between your two ideas, which I find really interesting. Like, you've mentioned creating a new language, and I feel like just now you kind of like hinted at some level of universality that maybe can be attained with these theories. And meanwhile, as a psychoanalyst, you were saying how each case is very individual and how it's one by one. And so I wonder, like, how your desire to kind of get a theory that, like, maybe takes Vieques as an example, or maybe as like a way to more broadly examine similar situations or repeating situations, and how that kind of can maybe reconcile or not reconcile with the fact that, or with the case-by-case approach, that, you know, there's a huge individuality.
Maybe I'll clarify. I'm not so interested in creating theories. Yeah, I think that maybe what I meant more was, you can, after a process of thinking very materially or formally and sensorially, get to a place where you are also thinking about abstract ideas, but that rather than get from abstract ideas to pay attention to certain things, I want to like look at ground level in a very kind of high resolution way. Very detailed is what I mean. And then from there analyze, or from there think about abstract political ideas. I just don't want to impose political analysis or philosophical analysis onto a place where it doesn't make sense. No? Yeah.
And maybe to go back to this tension between the individual and the collective, or the case and maybe the more of a structure. It is interesting because the way theory is constructed in the psychoanalytic context is the clinical practice, which is the couch is our anthropological window. We see individual instances of something that could then relate to a social discourse. Like, I, for instance, in my practice, discover questions about gender before they show up in the news. And I think this is the wonderful thing. We were talking about surprise, that every time something the truth emerges, the truth of the unconscious emerges, is surprising both for the analyst, but also for the analyst. And there is this movement from each particular instance onto maybe the possibility of building a theory that could account for maybe the appearance of several individual cases that could give an account of a structure. I think there is this idea in psychoanalysis that for a symptom to be formed, there has to be an overdetermination. Many factors operate at once to create a symptom. A person suffering from ataque de nervios in North Philadelphia is suffering from many different things. He's suffering from an individual family pathos, he's suffering from a post-colonial situation, he's suffering from marginalization, he's suffering from poverty, and also he's enjoying the symptom. So there are all these things at once. So I think this is what makes our work very interesting, because we work at several levels. I think it's hard to transform that into a political platform, but there is a political aspect and a collective in the particular and individual at once, both levels. It's more like a hinge rather than a contradiction. It's an articulation of both, I would say.
Recently, last year and the year before that, I was in Haiti doing a project at the invitation of some people there. And I learned something there about Creole, which is, it's a new language. It's a new language that comes out, I mean, new hundreds of years, but new, that comes out of specific political, colonial forces, and proposes a new way of thinking as well. And here's one example of that, and from thinking from the place. In Haiti, the word neg means person. So if you are, and this is inscribed within the constitution. So neg is not a black person. It is a person who is a citizen of Haiti, no matter what the color of their skin. This is a really profound transformation of the idea of universal, who the universal subject is. So, and then a blanc is not a white person, but a foreigner. So you can be a black Haitian who is coming from the United States, and you are a blanc. And you can be a white person who is regarded as a Haitian citizen. You are a person who is a neg. This is, you cannot get there through theory. You get there from understanding the history of the place and seeing the result of what that one word can do. And then from there you think, and it's amazing what comes from just that breaking of the language or opening up of the language, which is not possible to, it's not possible to do the operation the other way. This is what is so incredible, so interesting about clinical ground level, the person, the subject formation, thinking from there, the possibility to go from there to analysis or to politics or to abstract ideas is much crazier. Like, we get to places that are really wild, no? But we get to many more places as well. And so this is one of the, I think, commonalities in our very different kinds of work that we do, or why we were interested in each other's work, I think. I was just thinking about the word symptom and whether even the desire for a different kind of world or a different kind of language is a kind of symptom.
Maybe we need to footnote that. In our conversation, we were talking about in the 70s, psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan came up with this different notion of symptom that he called symptôme, using an archaic French spelling of the word symptom, to take the symptom away from the medical model, the symptom as a sign of something not working well that you need to get rid of, but rather as a creation, something that he takes as an example the work of an artist, James Joyce, and sees the symptom as an act of creation. It's a different kind of symptom that allows a person to exist rather than being a pathological part, behavior that needs to be corrected. And in that sense, we're talking about the art of the creative gesture, art, and the idea that in the process of an analytic cure, part of this ending of the treatment would be related to the creation of a symptom, a new kind of purified symptom that would require a sort of know-how, sort of art that, well, as I said before, perhaps not as gifted as that of an artist, but going back maybe to the etymology in Greek of art as techne, a know-how, that a certain know-how is created. And maybe this could be our political project, that it could this, maybe that psychoanalysis or certain interventions of art could offer different know-how that could have political implications. And with language, also, you mentioned, Beatriz, before, this discussion about translation, that Monique Wittig didn't like the idea of women, maybe because there is men in women, maybe we, without the men, or YL, which is also L in the plural, and we were talking about how could we find ways to be in language outside a certain gender binary that nowadays, in the 21st century, at least in the North American context in the US, we are seeing use of new pronouns. Are those new pronouns talking about a way of being outside the gender binary or not? And that was the conversation we also have, and maybe we wanted to hear from the audience how to think together. Could we maybe think outside the old binary that has been around for long enough, and maybe there are other ways of thinking different, perhaps?
I think we have time for one more question. So maybe.
I don't know if I was going to ask about the binary, but I was going to ask about how art from the Latin American modernisms, especially from El Cono Sur, maybe influenced this way of psychoanalysis being used as a political weapon. And the example that you give about forming new languages, I'm just thinking of when you were describing your example of neg, blank, and creating that new example, I was thinking of Joaquin Torres Garcia and inverting the map and making the north, the south-north and the north-south, and they are already up to something like that, but maybe in the terms of, I don't know, El Cono Sur or Sudamerica, and I was wondering if maybe Caribbeanness and the bastardism and that's already something for translating and thinking the new languages from a place-based thing. I'm just wondering if the artistic legacy of Latin America, which is very modernist and avant-garde, but they always integrated it from the ground level that you were describing. It was always very experiential and phenomenological. And I think that goes hand in hand, maybe not with psychoanalysis of thinking from a language, but from, that experiential aspect of it, of creating a new language as well.
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, I don't think I can speak sort of competently about the history, but from my understanding, yes, those ideas, I mean, I know that they're very tied in the work of Ligia Clark and, in many other artists, there are parallel processes going on and also like situated politically. And in terms of, I think that syncretic thought, let's say, like what that sort of cultural presence does to the possibility of thinking about a new language is to know from the outset that new language doesn't mean perfect, functional, communicative, that it can start broken, that it can start meaning many different things at the same time, that it can start, I mean, I think that that's one possible way also of thinking about new language from a very situated point of view.
Well, with new languages, I think we're going to end the evening. Thank you for coming out. Also, I will say that on June 2nd, it's a Thursday, we will have a performance in here in the theater. It is a performance by Masha Colon, who, for those of you who've been upstairs, you can hear her music. It's amazing pop music in the underground scene in Puerto Rico. And there will be, it will be a collaborative performance that will engage many of the masks that you see upstairs. I think there may be some text by Wittig that will be integrated into the performance. There will be lighting, it'll be a full-on pop experience. So please come back on June 2nd.